Starting early in the morning of the day, I went to see Barry McGee and Clare Rojas, married artists whose story I've been wanting to tell since I first heard it 13 years ago. A robin redbreast started hurling itself at the glass window in their living room. "It wouldn't stop," Clare said. "It knew you were coming." She cut out 3 paper birds and pasted them to the window to warn the bird away. Thud. It dove suicidally again, causing her 3 dogs to bark wildly. Clare said, "Maybe it's Margaret." In 1999, when Clare was in her early 20s and had recently graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design, she started sending cassette tapes of her music to Barry and his wife, Margaret Kilgallen, who was also an artist. Margaret was beautiful, a wisp of a woman with wavy auburn hair and vivid blue eyes, self-effacing but stubborn, an idealist and an imp. She played the banjo and surfed, and the women she depicted, smoking, fighting, huge, painted freehand on gallery walls, did the same. Margaret and Barry were twinned, kindred, each other's first love. They ate the same, dressed the same, painted side by side, often on scraps of wood they dragged in from the street, using discarded house paint that they got for free. Together they went up and down the West Coast, sneaking into train yards and graffitiing their aliases on boxcars. Margaret and Barry stood at the center of a group of San Francisco artists called the Mission School. Their outsider aesthetic, with its roots in graffiti and mural art and old-timey sign painting, was starting to dominate and shape the contemporary art scene. They had shows in London and New York and LA and Tokyo. Barry represented the United States at the Venice Biennale. Margaret was later in the Whitney Biennial. Like many young female painters of her generation, Clare looked up to Margaret. Before long, though, this aesthetic crush, so common and benign among artists, turned into something else entirely, leading some to say that what Clare wanted was not to be like Margaret, but to be her. To the extent that this is true, I think that Margaret may have wanted it, needed it, too. The music Clare sent Barry and Margaret was naive and stripped down, just a guitar and a voice. They listened to it obsessively. They started a correspondence with Clare, little thank you notes and encouragements about her music and about her own paintings, which were miniature, intricate fairy tale scenes. Clare sent more tapes. When Margaret got pregnant, she filled the pages of her sketchbook with possible baby names: Piper, Mojave, Bianca, Clare, spelled like Rojas, C-L-A-R-E. 7 months pregnant, Margaret went to Philadelphia for a group show, West Coast artists and their East Coast counterparts. Clare was one of the East Coast artists, and so the pen pals met properly at last. Clare remembers Margaret up on a gigantic ladder, a willowy woman with a huge belly, painting with roller brushes onto the walls late into the night. One night in Philadelphia, Clare saw Margaret run into the bathroom and followed her. Her unflappable new friend was sobbing, terrified. Something was horribly wrong with Margaret's body. That much was clear. Few outside Margaret's close circle knew it, but she was a cancer survivor, and shortly after marrying Barry had undergone a mastectomy. After the surgery, she chose not to have chemotherapy or radiation. Her doctors thought she would be fine. But throughout her pregnancy, she had premonitions, pains that her midwife explained away. In her sketchbook, Margaret made lists of carcinogens and ominous assemblages of words: far away, underneath, dead weight spelled W-A-I-T. In her private thoughts, it was only a matter of time. Along with her baby, a tumor was growing inside Margaret. and on some level it seems she knew it. After Philadelphia, she learned that the cancer was in her liver, where it had lain undetectable behind the baby, hidden. Her mother, who had also had breast cancer, told me that she urged Margaret to get treatment immediately, but again, she refused. She wanted to see the pregnancy through without adding any other variables. In June 2001, a month before her due date, she gave birth to a baby girl and then started an aggressive treatment regimen. She named the baby Asha, hope in Sanskrit. 3 weeks later, Margaret died. Not long before that, Clare received an email from the curator of the Philadelphia show letting her know that Margaret wanted her to call. Clare put it off, too shy. Then the curator called to tell her that Margaret was gone. "So you don't know what she wanted to say to you?" I asked. "No idea," Clare said. Barry, who had been sitting there saying almost nothing, just quietly shaping a little twist tie into a heart, suddenly looked up and said, "It wasn't to come meet me?" Clare said, "This was an arranged marriage by Margaret. I swear to God." The terrible economy of Margaret's death, one person leaving as another entered, gave it a mythic quality. The baby whose cells had multiplied along with the cancer was a little miracle, and Margaret, as the mother who had given up her life so that her child could live, was a martyr, even if that story was a fiction or at least an illusion, because Margaret was never presented with that stark choice. It was natural that Barry asked Clare to perform at the memorials. Margaret had loved her music. After a few months, he asked Clare to be part of a group show of artists that Margaret had admired. He brought Asha. The gallery was noisy and dusty, except for Clare's space, which was quiet and clean, painted blue and pink and strung with garlands of birds and little nests. Unconsciously, Clare says, she'd built a nursery for Asha. Clare moved in with Barry and Asha in San Francisco. She'd fallen in love with both of them, but she was also driven by a cooler, more mysterious impulse, a sense of obligation to a woman she had never even really known. She went to train yards with Barry so that he could graffiti boxcars with Margaret's tag. She learned to surf. Everyone remembered Margaret's banjo playing. Clare walked the streets of the Mission with the guitar slung across her back, holding the hand of the little girl she now called my daughter. At the same time, Clare's paintings began to bear an uncanny resemblance to Margaret's. Was it an appropriation, or an act of selflessness, or some strange amalgam of the two? Clare was a young, ambitious artist, processing her experiences through her work. The guilt, the loss, the ghostly love triangle. She was memorializing Margaret and extending her purchase on the human plane. But to others, it was clear. Clare was there in Margaret's place, living a life that didn't belong to her, painting a lie, somehow to blame. Clare says, "I went under two shadows, Margaret's and Barry's, and I don't think I'm out of it yet." 4 years ago, she decided to abandon the feminist narrative that has been present in her work since her school days. All her work now is abstract. The response? People say it reminds them of Margaret. Things Clare was told: not to wear hair clips, not to wear corduroys, not to paint a woman, not to use the color red. That Barry had turned her into Margaret because he missed her. That Barry just wanted her to be his maid. It was no wonder if she felt like an imposter. Margaret's clothes filled the dresser drawers. Her materials were stacked on every available surface. Clare ate her meals on furniture Margaret had dragged in from the street. An old Happy Meal Margaret had found interesting was left in place. The same went for a donut and some ho-hos. Clare resented it, and she resented herself for resenting it. In order to stay, she had to believe. Margaret was an angel. Margaret was a martyr. From one point of view, Margaret's death had given Clare her life. There was no room to complain or even tidy up. Barry's mourning was reiterative, ever-present, and never happening. He surfed and he worked incessantly. Just as Clare disappeared for a while inside Margaret's style, she also lost herself in the work that was left to her to do. Starting at the age of 25, she took care of Asha. At Asha's school, people assumed that Clare, half Peruvian, short and strong to Asha's wisp, was the nanny. Clare adopted Asha in 2008. To this day, she refuses to have her own baby, though Barry begs her. She's afraid of what would happen if she were to die. Who, you might be asking, is the real martyr? Grief is slow, and the stuff of the dead is obstinate. A few years ago, Clare insisted that Barry box up Margaret's stuff and take it to his studio. He can't yet bring himself to sort through it. It sits there in cartons and in stacks, out of view, where it can't make him sad. In the studio, Barry showed me an old painting of Clare's, something he'd rescued from the garbage. In a fanciful, Margaret-esque font, she's painted the word, outweight. These days, purging old belongings is becoming a family pastime. While I was visiting, Asha cleared 2 bags of giveaway stuff and 2 bags of garbage from her room. At 13, she is tall and slim, with a gentle, easygoing sweetness, so reminiscent of her mother that her grandmother often slips and calls her Margaret. In recent months, friends of Margaret's have been reaching out to Asha, wanting to impart something of Margaret's spirit, now that she's old enough to understand. "Oh my God, girl," Clare said, seeing Asha's clean room. She asked Asha if she'd like to put a cozy reading chair in there. "You can have Margaret's chair, how about that?" Clare said. Asha bounded to the living room and lay sideways across a big mustard-colored upholstered chair. "I want to get rid of it," Clare said. Asha replied, "And that's my favorite chair." Clare still thinks about Margaret every day. Sometimes it's from joy, and sometimes it's from frustration, and sometimes it's from sorrow, she said. "She gave me Asha, and I will obviously never forget that." But on a basic level, the adoption freed her. With it, she literally felt like she was saying goodbye to Margaret. Barry wants to exist in the present, stay alive, move on. He's stopped using Margaret's tag and no longer agrees to requests that he recreate her wall paintings for museum shows. Though in his head he sometimes still hears the haunting sound of Margaret's banjo roll, he too is slowly saying goodbye. But I got the sense, watching Asha clear the space in her room and leap to get her chair, Asha, who is at the threshold of her life as a woman, an artist in the making, already a source of inspiration for both Barry and Clare, a kind child whose empathy her father thinks comes from being raised by grievers, that she, Asha, is just about to say hello. Thank you.